When we picture World War II, we think of black and white footage, screaming dive bombers, tanks rolling through ruined cities, and the grit of young soldiers charging into chaos. We think of strategy, sacrifice, and survival. But there's one question that almost never comes up, a quiet question buried beneath the thunder of artillery. What did they eat? Seriously, before that soldier jumped into the foxhole, before he stormed a beach under gunfire, did he have breakfast? And if so, what was it? War begins with food, not bullets. Before a single bullet is fired, before any nation draws battle lines, an army must be fed, not once, not occasionally, every single day, in mud, in snow, in jungles, under siege. Feeding millions of soldiers across oceans wasn't just a logistical puzzle. It was a war within a war fought with spoons, not rifles. These rations had to survive months in humid jungles, freezing trenches, or rusted-out tanks. They had to be compact, cheap, high in calories, and crucially not kill the soldier who ate them. Flavor. That came somewhere between won't explode if dropped and doesn't attract rats. The most overlooked battlefield weapon. Food is rarely seen as a weapon. But in World War II, it was soldiers didn't just fight with guns. They fought with what was or wasn't in their stomachs. And the results were mixed. American scientists engineered nutrition into boxes that looked hopeful, but tasted like despair. German troops began the war with real meals and ended it chewing ersatz bread filled with sawdust. Japanese soldiers trained to fight hungry, sometimes for days, living on rice balls and willpower. British troops held on to tea as if it were the last line of defense against fascism, and maybe it was. Soviet soldiers survived on cabbage, potatoes, and sheer, stubborn grit. You remember the food more than the firefight. After the war, many veterans were interviewed. One theme kept repeating. They remembered the food, more than the gunshots, more than the battles, more than the fear. Why? Because food wasn't just nutrition. It was identity. It was memory. It was the only moment in a hellish day where a soldier could sit down, chew something, and feel human. One American veteran wrote in his journal, "I didn't dream about medals or victory. I dreamed about butter. Just butter on warm bread. Not just survival, but sanity." War psychologists would later confirm it. Eating is one of the last rituals of normalcy when everything else has collapsed. Sitting in a muddy trench, warming a tin of beans. That's home. Brewing weak coffee on a helmet over a fire. That's humanity. Sharing a hard cracker with a wounded friend. That's brotherhood. Food tethered soldiers to the idea that the world hadn't completely gone mad. That's somewhere. Somehow, life still made sense. The logistics of feeding an army. Let's take a step back and admire the madness behind the meals. To feed millions of troops every day, nations had to create portable meals that wouldn't spoil, include enough calories for a man to march 20 miles and still shoot straight, design packaging that fit in a rucksack and could be opened under stress, produce rations en masse. Even when factories were being bombed, this was a war not only of steel and strategy, but of powdered eggs and processed meat. In America, entire teams of scientists worked on making Spam less soul-crushing. In Germany, they found ways to stretch bread with straw flour. In the USSR, boiling water with cabbage was an act of spiritual resistance. Meals made for morale or misery. Here's the brutal truth. The difference between high and low morale wasn't always bullets. Sometimes, it was beans. In one British division, a hot cup of tea was all it took to stop a mental breakdown. In the Pacific, an American troop once traded his last cigarette for half a Hershey bar and said it was the only joy he'd tasted in months. Across all nations, mealtime wasn't just a break. It was therapy, a moment of silence, a taste of home, even if that home was a lukewarm can of greasy beef and crackers that doubled as dental hazards. Why this story matters. We've seen hundreds of WWII documentaries. We've watched soldiers brave Normandy, cross into Berlin, and fight in the Pacific jungles. But how many times have we asked, what did they chew on while waiting for the next shell? What did they heat over a barrel fire in the freezing cold? What was the last bite they took before crawling into combat? It matters, because these meals told a different story. One of endurance, boredom, pain, humor, and memory. You can't talk about the human side of war without talking about how humans kept themselves fed. That's why we're here tonight. This video isn't about generals or treaties. It's not about the politics or the weapons. This is about the corned beef that crushed morale, the chocolate bar that saved lives, and the field kitchens that meant hope. We're going to walk through the weird, wonderful, and occasionally horrifying world of WWII food. From the dry, cardboard-like K-rations of the U.S. Army to the cabbage-fueled endurance of Soviet troops, to the soggy rice of Japanese soldiers stranded in tropical hellscapes. This is the story of World War II, not told through bullets, but through biscuits, beans, and bad coffee. Coming up next, we begin with America and a box that changed everything. The K-ration, small enough to fit in your hand, dense enough to kill your appetite, and designed with more chemistry than flavor. Let's unbox it, one meal at a time. Imagine this: you're a U.S. soldier in World War II. You've marched 12 miles. You've been shot at more times than you can count. Your boots are soaked, your nerves are fried, and your stomach sounds like it's auditioning for the next artillery barrage. You reach into your pack. What do you get? A small cardboard box the size of a brick, the K-ration. The box promises calories, survival, and not much else. The birth of the K-ration. Designed by science, not taste. The K-ration wasn't born in a kitchen. It was born in a lab, created in 1941 by physiologist Drs. Ansel Keys, yes, the same Keys who'd later define the Mediterranean diet. The K-ration was meant to be compact, complete, and caloric. Taste. That was optional. Originally developed for paratroopers and special units on short missions, it quickly spread to every soldier in the field. Each K-ration came in 3 boxes: breakfast, lunch, dinner. Each contained about 200 calories per day, just enough to fuel a soldier through combat if he didn't mind crying a little afterward. Breakfast. A lie in a can. The breakfast box opened with false hope. A can of ham and eggs that resembled neither. Rock-hard biscuits, imagine biting a wall. A packet of lemonade powder. Instant coffee strong enough to dissolve your doubts. A stick or 2 of gum. 4 cigarettes, yes. Really, and perhaps most haunting, 1 square of toilet paper. Not 1 roll, 1 square. Make it count. Veterans joke that breakfast set the tone. If the food doesn't kill you, the irony will. Lunch. Chewing through sadness. Lunch was where optimism went to die. A standard midday box might include cheese spread with the consistency of industrial glue, more biscuits, harder than the last batch, a chocolate bar dense enough to stop a bullet, a sugar cube or 2, no spoon, just your knife, a stick, or blind desperation. If you were lucky, you'd get a tiny can of meat paste or peanut butter. If you were really lucky, you'd find a Hershey's chocolate bar, which, for one fleeting moment, could remind you of home, dinner, beans, and trauma. Dinner in a K-ration was a gamble. The meat and beans tin often looked like something found at a crime scene. Soldiers would sniff it, poke it with a bayonet, and sigh. You might get Spam or chili. More biscuits the military never ran out. Gum. Again. A fruit bar, allegedly apple-flavored, but more accurately wood-flavored. One veteran described it as a whisper of apple passed over a lump of cardboard and shame. Still, it was food, barely, enough to survive. The bartering economy of rations. Here's the part you don't see in the documentaries. Soldiers became black market traders with their own currency. The K-ration. Didn't smoke. Trade your cigarettes for extra chocolate. Hated cheese. Swap it for a meat tin. Found a real Hershey bar. Congratulations, you're now a god. This barter system kept morale afloat. It wasn't just about taste, it was about control. In a world where everything was uncertain, choosing between powdered lemonade or bitter coffee gave soldiers a shred of power, when chocolate meant more than calories. Every once in a while, tucked inside a K-ration, was something magical. A real Hershey's bar, not a D-ration, not a dense, tasteless survival brick. A real, creamy, sugary chocolate bar. One bite, and you weren't in a trench anymore. You were 10 years old, back in your hometown, with clean socks and a warm kitchen. It was more than comfort food. It was a portal to sanity. Field hacks, from K-rations to makeshift cuisine. Soldiers didn't just eat K-rations, they manipulated them. Biscuits were crushed and mixed with coffee creamer and powdered eggs to make pancake-like mush. Spam was sliced, fried, and sometimes pressed between 2 crackers for a sad sandwich. Lemonade powder became the world's worst cocktail ingredient. Gum used to plug leaks in canteens. It wasn't gourmet, it was battlefield alchemy, nutritional impact, fueling the war, barely. Despite the trauma-inducing flavors, the K-ration was a nutritional feat. It packed enough fat, sugar, and protein to sustain heavy activity. But there was a catch. K-rations were never meant to be eaten for weeks on end. They were short-term emergency meals, 2 to 5 days max. In reality, some troops lived on them for months, leading to weight loss, digestive issues, vitamin deficiencies, and what some doctors called K-ration fatigue, basically. Your body rejected it out of sheer psychological protest. Packaging, more than just a box. Even the box mattered, waterproofed with wax. Labeled by meal type B, L, D, designed to be opened in freezing rain or under stress. Soldiers would joke about collecting the whole set, as if K-rations were trading cards. And they often used the boxes for kindling, writing notes, or even toilet paper because, again, one square is a cosmic insult. Stories from the field, what K-rations meant. Let's hear it from the soldiers themselves. One Marine said he'd rather be shot than eat another can of ham and eggs. A paratrooper kept the same uneaten fruit bar for 4 months, not as food, but as a joke. A GI in the Ardennes cried when he found a Hershey bar in a resupply crate, not because of hunger, but because it reminded him of his mom. Food wasn't just fuel, it was memory, emotion, connection, even if it came in a soggy, olive drab box. Conclusion. A meal that won the war, kind of. Was the K-ration delicious? No. Did it give soldiers joy? Rarely. But did it keep them alive long enough to liberate Europe and storm islands in the Pacific? Absolutely. The K-ration was a brick of bland resilience, forged in labs, packed in crates, and eaten in trenches. It didn't taste like victory, but it helped make victory possible. Coming up next, what if the K-ration was a bit too soft for military taste? Let's talk about the D-ration, the chocolate bar designed to survive the apocalypse and ruin your teeth. If the K-ration was a bland brick of survival, then the D-ration was a punchline in chocolate form. Imagine being handed a bar of chocolate. Your eyes light up. Your hopes rise. Maybe you even smile. Then you bite into it and instantly regret every decision that brought you to this moment. That was the D-ration, a chocolate bar engineered by the U.S. Army to last forever, withstand extreme temperatures, and most importantly, be just barely edible enough to keep you alive, but not enjoyable enough to be eaten for pleasure. Yes, that was a real design requirement. Born in a lab, not a kitchen. In 1937, the U.S. Army Quartermaster Corps partnered with the Hershey Chocolate Company with one goal: create a bar that wouldn't melt in the tropics, wouldn't spoil for years, wouldn't be eaten casually by hungry soldiers unless absolutely necessary. The result? A chocolate bar that looked like food, but chewed like chalk, tasted like sadness, and could stop a bullet in a pinch. What was in this thing? Here's the actual ingredient list: cocoa fat, sugar, oat flour, artificial flavoring. That's it. No milk, no cream, no joy. Each bar weighed 4 ounces, 113 grams, and packed 600 calories. It was supposed to serve as an emergency ration, something you'd eat only when starving, like on a life raft or while trapped behind enemy lines. And it delivered on that promise, because no one wanted to eat it unless they had to. Military-grade chocolate. You think a Snickers bar is dense. The D-ration made Snickers look like air. This thing was hard. Like, use it as a hammer hard. Soldiers described it as brown concrete, edible metal, a candy bar forged in hell's foundry. You couldn't bite it unless you warmed it over fire or let it soften in your hand, which, in winter, took hours. Some guys shaved it with a knife into hot water to create a drinkable sludge. Others gave up and used it to stabilize wobbly tent poles. One Marine reportedly used it to fend off a rat. Chocolate that ruined appetites by design. Here's the craziest part. The unappetizing taste was intentional. The Army didn't want soldiers eating it unless they were in actual emergency situations. So they asked Hershey to make it just good enough to chew, but so unpleasant that no one would snack on it casually. Mission accomplished. Veterans joked that the bar tasted like a burnt pencil or dirt and regret mixed with cocoa powder. One GI said, if you were starving and had one in your pack, you'd wait another hour just to be sure you were really starving. Psychological impact. The chocolate that made men cry. And yet, in certain moments, the D-ration became more than survival. In the Battle of the Bulge, a soldier trapped in the snow for 2 days broke a D-ration into pieces and rationed each bite like gold. Another American POW remembered sneaking a shard of D-ration past a guard and eating it slowly, savoring each dry flake like it was Christmas. In the Pacific, One troop buried half a bar near a tree as a kind of ritual, a guarantee that he'd come back for it someday. Even the worst food, when tied to survival, became symbolic, variance and evolution. The original ration was so unpopular that by mid-war, newer versions were slightly improved. A smoother texture, a little more sugar, a taste that moved from burnt book to mildly edible. Still, the damage was done. Soldiers continued to call it the bar that could kill morale faster than enemy fire. By 1945, it was largely phased out in favor of the tropical bar, another chocolate brick that survived the heat, but didn't taste like a war crime. Not just food borderline weapon? You think this is exaggeration. Consider this. A single D-ration bar could withstand a direct drop from 6 feet onto rock without cracking. It could survive in desert heat, Arctic cold, or inside a soldier's sock for weeks. Some post-war vets discovered D-rations still edible 30 years later with no mold, no spoilage, and no flavor improvement. If the zombie apocalypse ever comes, find a D-ration. It might break your teeth, but you'll live. The legacy of the D-ration. The D-ration is a strange footnote in the story of WWII. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't beloved. It wasn't even very chocolate-like, but it did what it needed to do. Keep soldiers alive long enough to fight another day. Provide calories in places where no food could be delivered. Serve as the literal last bite between life and death. It was grim. It was gritty. It was in its own way heroic. Because sometimes, survival isn't about delicious meals. It's about swallowing something awful and marching forward anyway. Coming up next, we're leaving the cans and cardboard behind for a moment and heading to the only place a soldier might get a hot meal, the field kitchen. Grab your mess kit. It's time to meet the rolling stoves of war. You're cold. You're soaked. Your boots are caked in mud and your hands are shaking. You haven't seen a bed in weeks. Then, drifting through the smoke and fog, you smell it. Something hot, something cooked, something real, a field kitchen. To a World War II soldier, it might as well have been a 5-star restaurant. What is a field kitchen? Field kitchens, sometimes called mobile mess kitchens, or rolling misery carts, were portable cooking stations hauled into combat zones. Some were small trailers, others were full trucks with burners, storage, and boilers. A few were so basic that they were just a set of pots and firewood dragged behind a jeep. But one thing united them all. They were the Frontlines' only hope for a hot meal. What was actually on the menu, that depended on where you were, who you fought for, and how lucky you felt. Here's a rough idea of what various armies might serve. US troops, cream-chipped beef on toast. A. Gazim. A. S. O. S. You can guess what the soldiers really called it. Meat stew, beans, mashed potatoes, coffee, British troops, lamb stew, tinned peas, potatoes, or even prunes boiled in mystery syrup. Soviet troops, cabbage soup, beet stew, buckwheat porridge, black bread. German troops, potato soup, sausages, barley porridge, dumplings early in the war. Japanese troops, rice, pickled vegetables, sometimes fish if supplies held. Portions were generous when supply lines were strong, and symbolic when they weren't. How it worked in practice. Soldiers lined up with their mess kits, heavy metal trays shaped like torture devices, and waited in the mud or snow. Sometimes for hours, food was ladled out by grim-faced cooks wearing stained aprons, balancing speed, sanitation, and suspicion. One scoop of meat, one of vegetable, one ladle of unidentifiable gray sauce, and always black coffee so strong it could power a tank. There was no seasoning, no cutlery if you lost your spoon, and no seconds, but it was hot, and that was enough. Field kitchens and morale. Let's be clear, field kitchens didn't just feed bodies, they healed minds. One hot stew could restore sanity. A warm cup of coffee might prevent a breakdown. A slice of bread with real butter. That was like a letter from home. Soldiers often wrote in their diaries that hearing the clang of pots and the hiss of steam gave them hope even more than hearing reinforcements were arriving. Inba. The smell of food wasn't just comforting. It was proof that you were still alive. Field cooks, the unsung heroes. Military cooks rarely get the glory, but they earned every ounce of respect. These men and some women had to cook for hundreds in all weather conditions, make meals with inconsistent, sometimes rotten supplies, avoid poisoning the entire unit, stay calm during air raids, sniper fire, and supply failures. They often built ovens out of oil drums, dug pits for fire pits, and turned rusted cans into serving spoons. They boiled beans under mortars. They baked bread on truck hoods. They kept armies moving. The downside: hygiene, disease, and mystery meat. Let's not romanticize this too much. Field kitchens had issues, big ones. Water sources were often contaminated. Rats were frequent visitors. Leftovers could fester into biological weapons. In some cases, diarrhea and food poisoning took more soldiers out of action than bullets. Stories abound of green meat, slimy potatoes, and soups that bubbled without heat. And every army had that one cook known for ruining even boiled rice. One American veteran wrote, "Our cook once made stew with pasta, raisins, and Spam. I still wake up screaming. Winter and the nightmare of frozen food. Winter made everything harder, including the food. Tins froze solid. Coffee turned to slush. Butter had to be carved with a bayonet. In the Battle of the Bulge, U.S. cooks used engine blocks as heaters and melted snow for water. Soldiers stood in snowdrifts, cupping bowls with frostbitten fingers, praying the food wouldn't freeze before they finished eating. A German soldier remembered thawing a meat tin over his helmet while shells whistled overhead, only for the contents to explode from pressure. Real stories from the mess line. U.S. Infantry, Italy, 1944. I traded my last pair of dry socks for an extra scoop of beans. No regrets. British soldier, North Africa. We sang hymns while waiting for stew. I don't know why. Maybe just to feel civilized again. Soviet soldier. Eastern Front. Cabbage soup was thin, but hot. That alone made it a treasure, even in chaos. The mess line offered something resembling order, a cue, a serving, a brief moment of routine. Coffee, the sacred elixir of war. We can't talk field kitchens without talking coffee. In the U.S. Army, coffee was practically a religion. Brewed by the gallon, stronger than reason. Served black, with powdered cream, if you were lucky. Cooks joked it could revive the dead. Soldiers said it made the difference between charging and quitting. German and British troops had ersatz coffee or tea, but few drinks matched the morale-boosting punch of a steaming mug handed over in the middle of no man's land. Why this mattered? Here's the truth. Hot food, resilience. Armies that fed their troops well, or even just warm, were more likely to hold morale. The field kitchen became a symbol of civilization, of structure, of something worth surviving for. Soldiers didn't expect gourmet meals, but they needed heat, flavor, human connection, even if all they got was stew. Conclusion. Food is memory. Long after the war, veterans often remembered the food more vividly than the combat. Not because it was delicious, but because it was real, tangible, warm. One GI said, "I don't remember my sergeant's last name, but I remember the soup we ate the day we lost him." That's what food does. Inva. It nourishes not just the body, but memory becoming part of how we remember pain, friendship, and the fight to stay human. Coming up next, the German army, once known for discipline and efficiency. They started the war with fresh rye bread and sausage and ended it with horse meat and margarine made from ash. Let's talk about the rise and fall of the Wehrmacht ration. When World War II began, German soldiers marched confidently across Europe, clean uniforms, well-trained, and perhaps most shockingly, well-fed. In 1949, the Wehrmacht had one of the best-fed armies on the planet. Their rations were designed for strength, morale, and yes, taste. But as the war dragged on, supply lines broke down, and with each passing winter and battlefield defeat, their once proud meals turned into a cruel joke of imitation. Foods, filler-laced bread, and margarine that could double as floor wax. This is the story of how Germany's rations started as nourishment and ended as punishment. The Golden Era. German soldiers ate well at first. At the beginning of the war, a typical German soldier received fresh dark rye bread, sausages including Metwurst, Leberwurst or blood sausage, butter or margarine, cheese, canned meats and fish, jam or marmalade, roasted grain coffee substitute Kaffeeersatz. Field kitchens followed troops closely, churning out hot stews, soups, dumplings, and potato dishes. German command believed in 3 hot meals a day, even in combat zones, and they pulled it off for a while. Veterans often said the bread was the best part. It was hearty, chewy, slightly sour, a taste of home that kept morale high. In fact, many remembered losing access to bread as more painful than losing warm beds. Meat, morale, and German pride. Sausage wasn't just a food. It was a cultural anchor, high in protein, Easy to transport, could last for days, smelled like victory for a while. Canned meats, including pork, beef, and even venison, were common. Some came from occupied territories. Others were produced domestically in massive military processing plants. Soldiers also had meat spreads to smear on bread, as well as hard cheese blocks that could survive heat and cold. It wasn't luxury dining, but it was recognizable, nutritious, and reliable. Logistics, Germany's early strength. Why were German rations so good at first? Because the Wehrmacht had short supply lines at first, strong industrial food production, highly centralized planning, a belief that well-fed troops fight better, and it worked, until the war got bigger. Then came Russia, and everything broke. The Eastern Front was hell. 500 mile supply lines, frozen terrain, constant ambushes, supply convoys destroyed, cities scorched, railways bombed, horses eaten, field kitchens couldn't keep up, supply trucks couldn't get through, fresh bread stopped arriving, meat became memory, the potato became a prize, and German rations mutated. The rise of ersatz, food that wasn't food. Ersatz means substitute in German. By 1942, it became a running joke and a national shame. Here's what ersatz rations included: bread with sawdust, straw flour or turnip pulp, margarine made from chalk, oil and starch, coffee made from acorns, beets, or roasted barley, meat that may or may not have come from a cow, sausages containing up to 40% plant filler or horse. One soldier joked, "You didn't bite it, you negotiated with it." The bread became so dense it could be used as helmet padding. The margarine wouldn't melt in the sun, and the coffee smelled like sadness and burnt dirt, horse meat and hunger. By 1943, German soldiers on the Eastern Front were regularly eating horse, dog unofficially, turnip stew, boiled cabbage, rotten potatoes, rat, if caught, and snow, lots of snow. They melted snow for water. They boiled old leather, some roasted boots. Others traded valuables with locals for eggs, butter, or a single tomato. Food was no longer a system. It was survival improvisation. One soldier wrote in his diary, "I saw a man cry today over a piece of bread." Supply failure, morale collapse. The collapse of German rations wasn't just a hunger issue. It was a psychological disaster. Troops burned more calories than they could consume. Malnutrition set in. Immune systems failed. Soldiers grew bitter, cold, desperate. The pride of German discipline cracked not from combat, but from the empty stomachs of its soldiers. Hitler's high command had promised a quick war, lightning victory, and secure logistics. They delivered turnip margarine, from machine to misery. In 1969, the German war machine moved like clockwork. By 1945, it wheezed forward, powered by hunger, or snow, and ersatz lies. What began as one of the best-nourished armies on Earth ended as a starving, freezing, foraging mob. Even the bread turned against them. Conclusion: bread as symbol, hunger as truth. Veterans of the Eastern Front didn't remember glory. They remembered bread, or more accurately, the absence of it. Food was no longer just calories. It was identity. It was betrayal. It was proof that Germany's war wasn't just lost on the battlefield. It was lost in the belly. A soldier can fight hungry, but no army survives on sawdust and snow. Coming up next, let's head deeper into that frozen hell. The Eastern Front, where soldiers German and Soviet battled starvation, rats, and each other, just for a scrap of soup. If World War II had a beating heart of horror, it was the Eastern Front, from the forests of Poland to the freezing edges of Siberia. This was where empires collided and logistics collapsed. It wasn't just a battlefield, it was a survival gauntlet. And in the middle of it stood soldiers both German and Soviet fighting, not just each other, but hunger, frostbite, rats, and the daily gamble of whether dinner would arrive. Let's step into the frozen mud and taste the fear. Snow as enemy. In the summer of 1941, Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, invading the Soviet Union with brutal speed. But they weren't ready for the sheer distance over 500 miles of supply lines. The terrain: mud, ice, swamps, forests. The cold temperatures dropped below 30 degrees Celsius, and the Soviet tactic of burning everything behind them. Result: by the first winter, German troops were trapped in snow, starving, and hallucinating about sausages, food. If you're lucky, soup. Meal on the Eastern Front often meant hot water with a floating potato peel, cabbage boiled into bitter mush, grease from an old tin can scraped into broth, Black bread. If it hadn't molded or frozen solid, soldiers burned crates, helmets, even rifle stocks to cook snow into water, only to find the canteen full of slush again within an hour. Many units resorted to roasting anything with legs. Rats, crows, squirrels, even insects. Rats, rivals, and midnight raids. Rats were the one thing in abundance. Fat, bold, well-fed on corpses and garbage. Soldiers fought them, ate them, or competed with them. Trench rats would literally drag food from under sleeping men. One German soldier wrote, "I woke up with one on my chest. He was nibbling at my bread. I figured he needed it more. Others didn't." Rat hunting became its own sub-war. Bartering, boots for potatoes. With rations failing, barter became currency. Cigarettes, bread, socks, sugar, buttons, potatoes. A spoonful of jam, a day's hope. Some German soldiers even traded with Soviet POWs, a quiet, strange truce built not on politics, but desperation. Others raided Soviet villages. A chicken here, a few carrots there. Many saw looting as the only way to avoid death. Hunger-induced madness. The lack of calories didn't just weaken muscles, it broke minds. Soldiers hallucinated full meals. Some hoarded empty tins and licked them for flavor. Others fought over bones already chewed clean. One survivor recalled, "I tried to eat snow, then I tried to eat paper. Then I started dreaming about eating my own hand." This wasn't metaphor. This was the line between man and animal slowly blurring. Soviet survival, cabbage and willpower. On the other side, Red Army soldiers weren't much better off. Their diet, cabbage soup borsch, black bread, boiled potatoes, dried fish. If lucky, unsweetened tea, if very lucky. Meat was theoretical. Tea was usually melted snow with a twig in it. Still, they fought, malnourished, exhausted, sleepless, but somehow standing, because in Soviet culture, suffering was part of strength. Soviet field improvisation. When official rations failed, Soviet soldiers adapted, dug up frozen potatoes from abandoned farms, roasted shoe leather, yes, real shoes, made soup from tree bark, grass, or flower bulbs. They joked about becoming turnips in their next life, just to escape eating cabbage again. They sang songs about dried fish, named their spoons, talked to their bread, and yet they kept going. Germans versus Soviets. Who suffered more? It's hard to measure. German troops started stronger, but collapsed faster. Soviet soldiers began weak but fought through sheer will. One German officer wrote, "We had better equipment. They had bottomless stubbornness." In the end, that mattered more. Both sides suffered frostbite, starvation, and the mental toll of dying slowly without bullets. When hunger breaks the soul, the Eastern Front taught one clear lesson. Hunger is a weapon, and it doesn't care who it kills. Soldiers didn't fear bullets. They feared rumors that the next meal shipment had been lost. They feared the cold that made fingers snap like twigs. They feared biting into bread and tasting mold, or nothing at all, because once food disappeared, everything else unraveled. Conclusion. The taste of the Eastern Front. What did the Eastern Front taste like? Boiled snow, rotten bread, fear. It was where war lost all glamour, where medals meant nothing, where food wasn't a ration, it was life itself, shrinking day by day. And yet, they endured, not because of calories, but because of some flickering instinct that said, one more bite, one more day, one more fight. Coming up next, let's visit the other side of desperation, the Soviet field kitchen, where cooks became magicians, and survival was stirred one pot at a time. Let's be honest. The Red Army didn't fight with luxury. They fought with grit, frostbitten fingers, and a spoonful of cabbage. But behind every frozen trench, every snow-drenched bootprint, there was a smoke trail rising in the distance, the sign of a miracle in progress. A Soviet field kitchen, and in that battered metal cauldron, a meal that may or may not kill you, but would definitely keep you going another day. The kuchnia, Soviet cooking under fire. Soviet mobile kitchens called Polovaya kuchnia were trailers hitched to trucks or pulled by horses. Picture a giant pressure cooker on wheels, belching steam in the middle of a frozen forest. They cooked stew, porridge, soup, and anything else that could be boiled, dumped, or vaguely chewed. Cooks were soldiers too often called Frontovai Povara, frontline chefs. They worked in the same mud, under the same shell fire, using whatever ingredients hadn't spoiled, frozen, or crawled away. The Holy Trinity, cabbage, potato, and porridge. Red Army rations focused on simplicity, calories, And availability. That meant 3 core ingredients: cabbage, shredded; boiled, fermented, or floating alone in water; potatoes, the miracle tuber of the Eastern Front; buckwheat kasha, cheap, filling, and vaguely nutty; add onions, old meat if available, and salt, and you had yourself a meal. No sauces, no spices, no garnish, just survival in a bowl. Secret ingredients, stolen goods, memories, and hope. Soviet cooks got creative. Sometimes they added sugar from a care package, threw in a smoked fish head for flavor, traded with locals for a beet, a carrot, or a jar of pickles, poured in vodka when morale dipped too low. One soldier recalled getting a stew with meat that crunched like bone and tasted like victory. They didn't ask where it came from. They just ate it. Field hacks and mess kit memories. Red Army soldiers ate from battered metal bowls, usually dented, scorched, or blackened by years of fire and use. Some named their bowls or spoons like Lucky Charms. Others cleaned them with snow, vodka, or just their sleeves. A few carved messages on them, love letters, prayers, or dark jokes. If you lost your mess kit, you were doomed to eat from your hands. Helmet, or hope. Where's the meat? On paper, Soviet rations included meat. In reality, it was salted beyond chewing, rotted before delivery, replaced with fat trimmings or mystery meat of unknown political allegiance. Occasionally, field kitchens received canned horse meat, lard, awful lungs, liver, stomach, and cooks turned it into something hot. At least, war by cooking pot. Make no mistake, Soviet field kitchens moved with the troops. Mobile, fast, and essential. They kept up during advances, hid behind hills during retreat, operated in forests, trenches, barns, ruins. Even when supplies failed, cooks boiled snow, dug up roots, and fed entire platoons from what looked like compost. They didn't serve meals. They served resistance, food, our identity. Soviet culture embraced food not as pleasure, but as sacrifice. A bowl of borscht was a political statement. Sharing bread was a revolutionary act. Going without and still fighting was considered heroic. One Soviet slogan read, "Eat little, work more, victory demands hunger." And yet, they sang songs while waiting in line for soup. They toasted with beet juice. They laughed over cabbage stew. That was resilience. Red Army style. Real stories from Red Army cooks. Leningrad Front cook. 1943. We boiled soup in a broken oil drum. It smelled like iron and onion. They cried when it ran out. Tank Battalion. Kursk. We served 500 men. We had 20 potatoes. We stretched it with boiled oats and courage. Infantry unit. Stalingrad. We cut ice with bayonets to melt for cooking. If you slipped and spilled the pot, you were cursed in 4 languages. Cold, frost, and frozen rations. Winter was brutal. Food froze mid-air. Cooks had to defrost bread by sleeping with it inside their shirts. Boil everything for hours just to break it down. Use engine heat or candle flames to warm tins. And yet they kept feeding armies. Not flavor, not nutrition, just enough heat and calories to keep going. That's all war asks. Conclusion. A bowl of Soviet survival. In the end, Soviet field kitchens weren't about cooking. They were about endurance. They turned frostbite into fuel. They stirred together cabbage, sorrow, and stubbornness. They made soldiers believe they could hold out just one day longer. Not with gourmet food, but with something hot, something human. And in a world torn apart by steel and snow, that was enough. Coming up next, we're crossing into the British trenches now, where meals were unseasoned, unloved, and somehow still carried by tea. Let's talk about British rations, the Empire's most unappetizing weapon. If war is hell, then British rations were the snack bar outside the gates. While other armies fought over meat and sugar, the British soldier faced a more insidious enemy: flavorlessness. Let's take a sip careful. It's lukewarm from the mess tin of the British Army, where tea was religion. Biscuits were bricks, and corned beef was a national burden. The holy trinity of British sustenance. British rations were built on 3 indestructible pillars: tea, hot, bitter, and sacred; hardtack biscuits, chalky, eternal, weaponizable; bully beef, tinned corned beef that looked like regret. These staples appeared in every theater, from the mud of Flanders to the jungles of Burma. They were consistent, they were dependable, and they were absolutely depressing. Bully beef, the meat that time forgot. Bully beef wasn't bullying anyone, unless you counted your stomach lining. It was pink, jellied, and congealed. Could be eaten cold or hot. Tasted like sadness and grease. Looked like what you scrape off a butcher's floor. Soldiers sliced it, fried it, mashed it, or just stared at it in defeat. Veterans often said, "You don't eat bully beef, you survive it." Biscuits, crunchy despair. Hardtack biscuits were legendary for all the wrong reasons. So dense they cracked teeth. So dry they absorbed nearby happiness. So flavorless they made dirt seem spicy. Some troops used them as coasters, shovels, or building materials. A few even claimed their dental issues came not from combat, but from trying to bite breakfast. Tea, morale in a mug. But, tea, the saving grace. Tea was not just a drink. It was comfort, routine, identity, warmth in a cold trench. Soldiers brewed it in helmets, mess tins, or anything that could hold hot water and not leak too badly. Even under fire, men would risk it all for a cup. If the shelling paused, the kettle came out. If the tea ran out, morale did too. Other notable delights. Let's break down the full horror show. Powdered eggs, looked like yellow sand, tasted like betrayal. Jam, so thick it could glue your mouth shut. Oatmeal, gray, slimy, and somehow offensive. Dried fruit, mostly pits and disappointment. Tinned prunes, known laxative. Occasional morale wrecker. Every meal was a surprise. A bad surprise. The can opener dilemma. British tinned food was both a gift and a curse. It lasted forever, but needed tools, strength, and divine patience to open. Some tins had roll keys. Others required bayonets, bricks, or prayer. Soldiers held deep opinions on which tin designs were merciful and which ones were sent by Satan. British food creativity. War edition. Despite their rations, British troops got creative. Jam plus biscuit, jam buddy sandwich. Bully beef plus oatmeal Tom trench loaf. Corned beef plus prunes. Digestion roulette. One North African unit mixed raisins, bully beef, and vitamin tablets into a fruit stew. They named it Desert Delight. It was neither what kept them going. In truth, not the food. What sustained the British soldier was routine, dry humor, and always tea. There are tales of men crawling under fire to rescue a kettle, of brewing in bombed-out ruins, of drinking tea made with salt water because it was the only thing hot. Tea wasn't nourishment. It was national character, steeped in muddy water. Real moments from the British mess. Burma campaign, 1944. The biscuits arrived moldy. We didn't care. They still didn't taste like anything. Italy, 1943. We found a tomato in a crate. We stared at it like it was a unicorn. North Africa, 1942. Made a stew with bully beef, prunes, and regret. Didn't die. Would not recommend. Conclusion. Keep calm. Chew on. British rations weren't designed to inspire joy. They were built to last, travel, not kill you. And sometimes, that was enough. You can conquer nations with corned beef, but you'll need tea to hold the empire together. In the end, British soldiers didn't eat for pleasure. They ate to prove they were still British. Coming up next, we head to the jungles of the Pacific, where Japanese soldiers survived on rice, rainwater, and terrifying discipline. Let's talk about Japan's invisible ration war. If the American soldier had rations, the British had tea, and the Soviets had cabbage. Then the Japanese soldier had rice and the terrifying ability to survive without anything else. Let's enter the jungles of the Pacific, where bullets weren't the only danger. Hunger marched with the Imperial Japanese Army, step for step, and often arrived first. What was in a Japanese soldier's pack? At the start of the war, a Japanese soldier carried white rice, barley sometimes mixed with rice, dried fish, pickled plums umeboshi, miso paste or soy concentrate, hard candies, occasional green tea or powdered drinks. It was compact, lightweight, culturally familiar, but in jungle warfare, utterly insufficient. Logistics, a national blind spot. Japan's military was brilliant in many ways, but logistics, that was their Achilles' stomach. Supply lines were fragile. Units were often left stranded. Rations spoiled in humid jungle air. Rodents and mold consumed food before soldiers could. As the war dragged on, entire units received nothing but a handful of rice per day or less. Jungle foraging, trial by stomach. When rations ran out, and they often did, soldiers adapted. They foraged wild roots, tree bark, leaves, frogs, insects, jungle fowl, lizards, or monkeys when available. In some cases, they ate moldy rice, palm stems, boiled grass, their own belts and boot leather. It wasn't about taste. It was about not dying. The invisible killer, starvation. Malnutrition destroyed entire battalions without a single shot fired. Skeletal soldiers collapsed mid-march. Blindness from vitamin deficiency. Psoriasis, weakness, delusions. Soldiers so dehydrated they couldn't swallow rice. Some simply lay down in the jungle and never got back up. One Japanese veteran remembered, "We stopped dreaming of victory. We dreamed of salt, discipline over desperation." What kept them going? A brutal sense of honor, self-denial, and cultural duty. Soldiers were told that hunger was a badge of pride. That starvation was purification, and many believed it. Treasured rations. Tea, salt, and candy. In the darkest days, small things mattered. A pinch of salt could lift morale. A few hard candies could distract from agony. A teaspoon of green tea was worth more than gold. These were hoarded, traded, and shared, and sometimes prayed over. One man divided a single sugar cube among 10 soldiers. They dissolved it in water, drank, and cried, silent suffering. Unlike American or Soviet troops, Japanese soldiers rarely complained. They endured in silence, because speaking out meant weakness. Many died without protest, without letters, without meals. They left behind empty packs and rice with weevils. And legends, jungle stories of hunger and hallucination. Guadalcanal, 1943. A unit boiled grass and rainwater for 5 days. One man hallucinated a hot pot of noodles floating above his head. Burma campaigned, soldiers roasted lizards and split the tail meat. They joked it tasted like chicken. It didn't. New Guinea front. A troop was found hiding under leaves, chewing the same piece of bark for 3 days. The dark footnote, cannibalism. In extreme, horrifying cases, some stranded Japanese units turned on each other. Cannibalism happened, rarely, but enough to stain the record permanently. It was not policy, and most accounts came from starvation zones where all else had failed. Still, it is part of the truth. Conclusion. War on an empty stomach. The Japanese soldier didn't march on protein or logistics. He marched on sheer will, rice balls, rainwater, and ideology. That was his ration. That was his reality. They weren't fed to win. They were fed to suffer bravely, and many did both. Coming up next, let's talk about what happened when soldiers from all sides ran out of food entirely and had to get creative, desperate, and sometimes genius. Field improvisation, the great wartime cooking experiment. When rations failed, when supply trucks vanished, when all that was left was a rusty tin and a patch of fire, soldiers became chefs of desperation. Welcome to the forgotten battlefield of wartime food improvisation, where hunger met creativity, and mess kits became kitchens. The universal rule, adapt or starve. Across every army, one truth emerged. You either learned to cook with nothing, or you learned to live with hunger. And so, they improvised, traded with locals, combined weird ingredients, used helmet fires, gun barrels, and tank engines as stovetops, invented strange, saddened, surprisingly edible recipes, American foxholes, K-ration experiments, in U.S. trenches. Soldiers hacked their rations with wild ideas. Cracker pancakes, crushed biscuits, plus coffee creamer, plus powdered eggs. Pan-fried, trench fondue, melted canned cheese mixed with beans. Spam witches, spam slices between biscuits, toasted with a lighter. Depression stew, crackers, sugar, cocoa powder, and boiling water. Don't try this. And for dessert, D-ration bar shards softened with breath. Not delicious, but warm. British field hacks, jam and irony. The British soldiers' arsenal included jam buddy, 2 hardtack biscuits smashed together with jam. Bully beef surprise, corned beef fried with crushed prunes and raisins. Vitamin stew, oatmeal, bully beef, raisins, and ground up vitamin tablets. One unit reportedly used tea not just as a drink, but to boil potatoes and mask the taste of bad meat. A sergeant said, "We boiled it until it surrendered. Then we ate it." Soviets, boiling anything with legs. Soviet improvisation knew no bounds. Cabbage stew, plul. Beet water, plul. Fish bones, red soup. Cooked in helmets, shell casings, or engine blocks. Some added snow and kerosene just to sterilize it. If it could be boiled, roasted, or smelled vaguely edible, it went in the pot. Soldiers named their dishes things like Victory, mashed potatoes and onions. Hero, soup water, pulls a single carrot. Lenin's sausage, unknown meat source. Japanese improvisation. Survival, sushi. In the jungles, Japanese troops made rice cakes, leftover rice mixed with pickled vegetables, refried into patties, leaf broth, jungle leaves, salt, water, boiled into green soup, miso slush, miso paste thinned into drinkable calories, onigiri with insects, rice bowls with fried crickets or ants. Tea became broth base, miso became sauce, and rice was worshipped. Shared across all armies, improvised meals had three things in common: creativity, lack of shame, shared laughter. Food became entertainment, morale, and survival. A bad stew meant you were still alive to eat it. Cooking gear, whatever worked. Kitchen tools of the battlefield included helmets as pots, bayonets as knives or skewers, tin lids as frying pans, ration boxes as kindling, shovels, grills. Really, a tank engine once cooked 40 eggs. A rifle barrel was used to roast spam. One squad made a tea kettle from a shell casing. Morale through meals. Improvised cooking wasn't just functional. It was mental armor. Something to do. Something to laugh about. Something to share. Soldiers held recipe contests. Swapped spice packs like treasure. Told jokes like, "This tastes like victory," mixed with mud. True stories from the front. Ous es cook. France. We called it trench gumbo. It was stew with beans, crackers, and 2 cigarettes for flavor. British infantry. Burma. We made pudding from jam, biscuits, and guilt. Soviet unit. Stalingrad. They said the soup had meat. We said, "Who's?" They laughed. We didn't. Japanese patrol. New Guinea. We caught a frog, boiled it with seaweed. It was the best thing we ever ate. Conclusion. Cooking as rebellion. In a world defined by bullets and blood, soldiers made meals that said, "I'm still here. I still taste. I still fight." Improvised cooking wasn't just about filling a stomach. It was about staying human. And in that moment, mess kit in hand, fire flickering, were paused, just long enough for one bite of something warm. Coming up next, after all that, what stayed with these men wasn't the fighting. It was the memory of the food and what it meant. Let's talk about the emotional aftertaste of war in the next part. When the bullets stopped and the bombs fell silent, what stayed wasn't just the trauma or the scars. It was the taste, yes, the food, or the lack of it, or the weird texture of that one canned meat that never left their tongue. Because for many veterans, food wasn't just nourishment, it was memory. Taste triggers memory. Psychologists now confirm what many veterans knew instinctively: the smell of cabbage, the taste of stale biscuits. It brings everything back. In VAR, meals are tied to locations, emotions, specific people, moments of terror or relief. A spoonful of stew could conjure a battlefield. A tin of meat could bring back a dead friend. Bully beef and broken memories. British veterans often joked about corned beef but never forgot it. Some said they couldn't eat it ever again. Others kept a can on a shelf, like a relic. One man brought it to his grandson's graduation, saying, "It kept me alive. I figured it should see me through this too." Taste as time travel. D-ration, the chocolate bar from hell. American GIs remembered the D-ration bar with deep, sarcastic reverence. Tastes like cardboard dipped in grief. Broke my tooth, saved my life. Still taste it when it rains. But they also remembered the moment they got a real Hershey's bar. That one sweet bite of home in a foxhole. Tea, the eternal soldier. British troops didn't remember battles. They remembered kettles. Tea in a trench. Tea on a tank. Tea at a funeral. Veterans said they could still hear the kettle whistling, even when surrounded by death. Because sometimes, tea was all that kept you civilized. Rituals of the mess kit. Many soldiers kept their utensils. Bent spoons. Blackened mess tins. Forks with initials carved in. Why? Because those weren't just tools. They were anchors to sanity. They'd scraped beans from them during firefights, held them tight when the bombs dropped, and sometimes cried into them. Care packages. Tastes from home. One of the most emotional memories. Care packages, sent from mothers. Wives. Sweethearts. Cookies that crumbled in the box. Coffee. Chocolate. Jerky. A letter folded between the crackers. Some hoarded them. Some shared every bite. All remembered them. A taste of love in the middle of hell. Quotes from veterans. "I can still smell cabbage soup when I wake up." 80 years later, a piece of chocolate saved me. Not because of calories, because it reminded me I mattered. I kept the tin. I buried the fear. Food formed feeling. In post-war life, some veterans couldn't eat certain foods again. Japanese veterans wept at the sight of plain white rice. Soviet survivors treated cabbage with quiet reverence. American GIs avoided Spam for decades until it returned ironically. Others cooked wartime meals for their families, as a ritual. A way to say, this is where I was, this is how I survived. Closing reflection. In the end, war is a storm, but food, even the worst of it, is a thread. A spoonful of stew, a cracker in your hand, a bite of bitter chocolate. These become markers of humanity, proof that you endured, that you ate, survived, remembered, and that, somehow, you came home. Up next, what happens after the war? Let's trace how the battlefield shaped peacetime diets, national cuisines, and global food culture, all thanks to soldiers' stomachs. War doesn't end at the ceasefire. Its aftertaste lingers, long after the guns are gone. And in no place is that clearer than the kitchen, because the meals soldiers ate in trenches, jungles, and bombed-out cities would go on to shape entire peacetime food cultures, industrial supply chains, and even the way we snack today. Let's explore the culinary legacy of World War II, one can at a time. Canned food goes mainstream. Before WWII, canned food was considered military, emergency, not for daily life. But after the war, soldiers came home. They were used to tins, so they bought tins. Spam, tinned beans, evaporated milk, powdered eggs. These items went from bunkers to breakfast tables. Entire supermarket aisles were built on wartime convenience. Chocolate ration, candy aisle explosion. The D-ration bar was hated, but its psychological power was real. After the war, Hershey expanded. Nestle scaled globally. Chocolate became a comfort item, not just a treat. Soldiers who fought in Europe brought back a taste for Swiss chocolate, Belgian pralines, British chocolate bars, and kids of the 1950s got candy that originated in field tests, instant meals, and powdered everything. WWII tech led to freeze-dried coffee, powdered milk, dehydrated soup, instant mashed potatoes. These were designed for logistics to last forever and travel far. Post-war companies saw opportunity. Convenience foods for busy families, TV dinners in the 1950s, MRE-style lunches for school kids. The field kitchen became the microwave. Spam, from survival food to global icon. Spam was a joke. Spam was a meme. But Spam was also portable protein, a symbol of resilience. A post-war export boom, especially in South Korea, Philippines, Hawaii, Guam. In these places, Spam became breakfast, lunch meat, gift item, cultural staple. It even entered wedding menus and Michelin star kitchens. Spam survived the war and then thrived in peace. Japan's post-war rice obsession, starving in the jungle, left a mark. When peace came, rice became sacred. Japanese industry reinvented rice cookers. Instant ramen was born 1958 to feed the masses cheaply. The memory of hunger drove innovation. Canned fish, bento culture, vacuum-sealed miso soup. Post-war Japan turned food into an art of never starving again. Soviet food culture, cabbage and memory. For decades after WWII, cabbage remained central. Dark bread stayed sacred. Pickled vegetables filled shelves. Why? Because these foods meant survival. Veterans taught their children, boil, preserve, store, don't waste. The post-war Soviet pantry was built on wartime trauma, Britain and the ghost of rationing. Even after WWII ended, British rationing continued until 1954. Its legacy, a national love of tea, a tolerance for bland food, a pride in stoic cooking, but also the rise of canned goods, instant puddings, economical cooking as a lifestyle. Wartime habits became cultural identity. The American food boom. American industry turned wartime logistics into fast food, drive-thrus, supermarkets. The war had trained Americans to eat fast, stockpile, love packaging. K-ration culture evolved into Lunchables, snack packs, shelf-stable everything. The battlefield became the grocery store. Why it matters. Food is memory. Wartime food wasn't gourmet, but it was emotional technology. It carried fear, hope, discipline, family, nationhood. So even today, a tin of beans still feels British. A bowl of rice still feels Japanese. A chocolate bar still feels American. Because every bite tells a story of hunger, disinvention, and survival. Final reflection. Wars are fought with weapons, But they're endured with food, a biscuit in a trench, a spoonful of stew in a snowstorm, a square of chocolate behind enemy lines. These moments didn't win battles, but they kept men alive long enough to try. And that is a victory worth remembering.